6 seconds after LeBell said, "That won't work," the room stopped moving. No argument followed. No explanation was offered. Those who were there would later agree on one thing only: nothing forceful happened. Yet the balance of authority shifted permanently. The method was quiet. The effect lasted decades. The space was not designed for attention. It was a working room, used between takes, between obligations, between performances, the kind of place where effort lingered in the air but no one spoke of it. Mats were worn thin. Equipment rested where it had last been set down. Conversation, when it happened at all, stayed practical. People came and went without ceremony. Some were fighters, some were technicians, some were there only because their schedules overlapped. No one treated the room as a stage. Bruce Lee was already there, not standing at the center, not warming up, not explaining anything. He was leaning slightly against the wall, jacket off, sleeves rolled in a way that suggested comfort rather than readiness. To someone unfamiliar with him, he could have been mistaken for another crew member waiting for instructions. Those who knew better noticed something else. He watched without interrupting. His attention moved slowly, not tracking individuals, but patterns, foot placement, balance. The way people spoke when they believed they were not being measured. He did not correct anyone. He did not introduce ideas. He did not claim space. This was typical. Bruce Lee rarely announced himself in professional environments. He preferred to let rooms reveal their own structure before he ever engaged with them. In places like this, hierarchy established itself naturally, through reputation, through past outcomes, through the confidence of those accustomed to being deferred to. LeBell was one of those figures. Even when he was not present, his name carried weight. When he entered, the tone adjusted almost unconsciously. He did not demand attention, but attention followed him anyway. Years of competitive proof had a way of settling rooms before words were exchanged. That afternoon, nothing suggested confrontation. The atmosphere was practical, even casual. A few men discussed technique, others stretched or rested. Someone laughed briefly, then returned to silence. It was not a crowd waiting for something to happen. Bruce Lee remained where he was. If he noticed LeBell enter, he gave no sign of it. His posture did not change. His expression stayed neutral. The two men were aware of each other in the way professionals often are, without urgency, without ceremony. What mattered was not who was present, but how secure everyone felt. LeBell spoke comfortably, the way a man does when he assumes common ground. His words were not aggressive. They were not even confrontational in tone. They were dismissive in the mildest way. A statement about method, not about character. That won't work. The sentence did not echo. It did not demand response, but it altered the room. Conversation paused, not abruptly, but naturally, as if people sensed that something had entered the space that did not belong to casual talk. No one looked directly at Bruce Lee at first. No one looked directly at LeBell either. The moment hung, unsupported. Bruce Lee did not reply. He did not smile. He did not explain. He stepped away from the wall, not quickly, not deliberately enough to signal intent, just enough to close a small distance that most had not noticed existed. What followed would not feel dramatic to those who witnessed it, but none of them would ever describe the room the same way again. LeBell's authority did not come from volume or posture. It came from record, from years in which outcomes had been public, verifiable, and final. In rooms like this, he did not need to test himself. His presence alone usually settled questions before they formed. When he spoke, it was assumed he was speaking from experience. The comment he made was not framed as a challenge. It was conversational, almost instructional. A remark offered into the air, shaped by habit more than intention. He had seen many systems, many claims, many demonstrations. Most of them failed under pressure. His sentence carried that history quietly within it. That won't work. He was not looking at Bruce Lee when he said it. This mattered. The words were directed at an idea, not a person, at least on the surface. In professional circles, this distinction allowed statements to pass without confrontation. Methods could be questioned. People were rarely addressed directly unless conflict was intended. Bruce Lee understood this distinction well. He did not correct it. He did not redirect the comment back toward himself. He did not treat it as a provocation. In fact, he treated it as something else entirely, as information. He had spent years in environments where his approach was misunderstood. His methods did not resemble established systems. They lacked the formal signals people associated with legitimacy. To many, they looked incomplete. To some, they looked naive. He had learned not to defend them verbally. LeBell's confidence was not performative, it was settled. He stood as someone who had already been tested and found sufficient. There was no need for escalation because, in his experience, escalation rarely changed outcomes. Others in the room sensed this imbalance, not an imbalance of ability, but of expectation. LeBell was expected to be correct. Bruce Lee, to many present, was still an unknown variable. His reputation existed, but it had not yet fully solidified in every circle. He was known as skilled, intense, unconventional, but that did not automatically translate to authority in this environment. This was not hostility, it was hierarchy. Bruce Lee moved within it without resistance. He did not adjust his stance to appear ready. He did not square his shoulders or shift his weight in ways fighters often do when preparing to demonstrate. There was no visual signal that he intended to answer the comment at all. Instead, he closed the remaining distance slowly, as if continuing a thought rather than initiating one. LeBell noticed this then. Not because he felt threatened, but because something about the movement did not align with what usually followed such remarks. There was no preface, no verbal framing, no request for clarification. Bruce Lee did not say, "Let me show you." He did not ask permission. He positioned himself just close enough to matter. In that moment, authority stood opposite confidence, neither aggressive, neither defensive. Two men accustomed to being correct in different ways, occupying the same space without negotiation. The room remained silent, not out of tension but out of recognition. Something was about to resolve itself, without explanation and without audience participation. Bruce Lee's face did not change. He was not proving a point. He was allowing one to finish forming. Silence does not arrive all at once. It settles unevenly, moving from person to person as attention shifts. In that room, it began at the edges. Conversations faded without anyone choosing to end them. Movements slowed. A few men straightened, not to prepare, but to see more clearly. No one announced that something was happening. There was no circle formed. No one stepped back to create space. Yet space appeared anyway, shaped by instinct rather than instruction. Those present sensed that whatever followed would not repeat itself easily. Bruce Lee and Jean LeBell stood close enough now that distance was no longer neutral. Still, neither man spoke. For the witnesses, this was unfamiliar territory. They were used to demonstrations that came with explanation, challenges that carried rules, confrontations framed by agreement. This moment offered none of those comforts. LeBell waited, but not impatiently. His posture remained open. He had not invited a test, and he had not refused one. His expression suggested curiosity more than readiness. Bruce Lee's demeanor remained unchanged. He did not scan the room. He did not acknowledge the attention that had gathered. If he was aware of the audience, he gave no sign. His focus was narrow, precise, directed entirely at the immediate exchange. Those watching would later struggle to describe what they felt. It was not excitement. It was not suspense in the usual sense. It was closer to inevitability, the sense that something had already been decided, and they were simply late to understanding it. No one expected violence. There was no reason to. Both men carried themselves with too much control for that. And yet, no one believed the moment would pass without consequence. Time stretched slightly. Not long enough to feel dramatic, but long enough for assumptions to surface. Some expected a verbal explanation. Others anticipated a technical demonstration, perhaps slowed down, made instructional. A few assumed nothing would happen at all, knowing how often reputations coexist without collision. Bruce Lee offered none of these. He adjusted his position by a fraction, a movement so small it might have gone unnoticed in any other context. His hands remained relaxed, his breathing steady. Nothing about him suggested exertion. LeBell's attention sharpened. This was the first visible shift. It was subtle, but those trained to read bodies noticed it. A recalibration. The recognition that something outside familiar patterns was unfolding. His stance did not change, but his awareness did. The witnesses leaned into that awareness without realizing it. They were no longer observing personalities. They were watching a principle being tested, though few could have articulated which one. The room held its breath, not because it expected impact, but because it sensed clarity approaching. No one interrupted. No one stepped forward. Whatever was about to happen belonged only to the two men at its center, and to the memory of those who would later try to explain why silence had felt so complete in that moment. Those closest later disagreed on exactly when it began. Some said it started with Bruce Lee's feet. Others noticed his hands first. A few were convinced nothing moved at all, that the change they felt came from somewhere less visible. What they agreed on was that it did not look like a technique being executed. There was no preparatory motion. Bruce Lee did not settle into a stance. He did not square himself or signal intention. His posture remained ordinary, almost casual, as if he were continuing a conversation that had not required words. The action itself occupied very little space. No swing, no strike, no obvious exertion. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like a minor adjustment, something incidental, easily dismissed. But Jean LeBell felt it immediately. Not pain, control. It was the sudden understanding that his balance no longer belonged solely to him, that a line he assumed was secure had been quietly crossed. His body responded before his mind fully caught up, adjusting to a condition it had not anticipated. Bruce Lee did not apply force. He applied placement. Those watching saw LeBell's expression change, not into alarm but into focus, the kind that comes when an experienced practitioner recognizes something precise and unfamiliar. His breath altered slightly. His weight shifted in a way that was corrective rather than defensive. The demonstration did not continue. It did not need to. Bruce Lee released the contact almost as soon as it had been established. There was no follow-through. No escalation. The entire exchange lasted only seconds, but its completeness made duration irrelevant. What lingered was not the movement, but the absence of contest. LeBell did not counter. He did not test the position further. He did not attempt to reverse it or examine it again. His body language suggested not defeat, but confirmation. Something he had doubted had just answered itself. The room remained still. Bruce Lee stepped back to where he had been moments before, not dramatically, not as a gesture, simply returning to his previous place in the space as if nothing of note had occurred. No one spoke. There was no applause, no reaction, no collective release of tension. The witnesses understood, without discussion, that explanation would diminish what they had just seen. Any attempt to describe it would turn it into something it was not. LeBell looked at Bruce Lee then, not challengingly, not defensively, with acknowledgement. It was brief, understated, and final. The method had been revealed only to those paying close attention, and even then not fully. What mattered was not how it worked, but that it had worked without needing to insist that it had. In that quiet, the room accepted a new arrangement, one established not through dominance, but through certainty. No one declared an ending. There was no verbal agreement that the exchange was over, yet everyone understood that it was. The room did not rush to fill the silence, as people often do when uncertainty lingers. Instead, it allowed the stillness to settle, as if speaking too soon would misrepresent what had just occurred. Jean LeBell was the first to move, not away from Bruce Lee but back into himself. His posture loosened slightly. The readiness that had sharpened him moments earlier eased, replaced by something closer to acceptance. He did not reach for humor or explanation. He did not attempt to reframe the moment in words. He simply nodded. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it carried weight. Among experienced practitioners, such gestures mattered more than statements. They signaled recognition without inviting debate. Bruce Lee did not respond. He did not return the nod or acknowledge it outwardly. His attention shifted away, not dismissively, but naturally, as if the matter had resolved itself internally and required no further handling. The witnesses felt the resolution before they understood it. There was no sense of victory in the room. No one thought in terms of winning or losing. What had occurred resisted those categories. It had not been a contest of endurance or strength. It had been an exposure, brief, precise, and complete. Conversation resumed slowly, not about what had happened, but around it. People spoke more quietly at first, choosing practical topics. The usual post-event analysis never arrived. There was nothing to analyze that could be shared easily. Each person carried a slightly different version of the moment, shaped by what they had noticed. Some focused on the lack of effort, others on the speed. A few fixated on LeBell's reaction rather than Lee's action. All agreed that whatever they had seen, it had not required emphasis. LeBell did not attempt to replicate the exchange. This, too, was noticed. A man of his experience could have asked questions, requested clarification, or initiated further testing. He did none of these things. His restraint communicated as much as Bruce Lee's demonstration had. The balance in the room had shifted, but quietly. Bruce Lee did not occupy a new position of authority in any visible way. He did not become the center of attention. He did not alter the dynamic intentionally. And yet, people now watched him differently, not with awe, with attention. The silence that followed the demonstration was not emptiness. It was resolution, the kind that closes a question so thoroughly that reopening it feels unnecessary. Years later, those who were present would struggle to explain why the moment stayed with them. There had been no spectacle, no raised voices, no decisive blow. Yet the memory remained unusually clear. They remembered not what Bruce Lee did. They remembered that nothing more needed to be done. The story did not circulate immediately. In the weeks and months that followed, it was mentioned only in fragments, usually in passing, often without detail. Those who spoke of it rarely agreed on specifics. The setting shifted slightly from telling to telling. The exact movement blurred. Time compressed or expanded depending on who remembered it. What remained consistent was the silence. People recalled how quickly the room had understood that nothing more would happen, how no one felt the need to frame the moment as a victory, how the exchange resisted embellishment, as if adding detail would make it less accurate rather than more. LeBell never denied the incident. When asked, he did not dramatize it, he did not elevate it into legend. He spoke of it the way experienced men speak of things that taught them something without injuring their pride. Briefly, clearly, without defensiveness. Bruce Lee never spoke of it at all. This was consistent with his approach. He did not catalog demonstrations. He did not collect moments of validation. His teaching rarely relied on examples drawn from personal encounters. Instead, those encounters lived on through the people who had witnessed them. Years passed. Bruce Lee's reputation grew, then transformed. What had once been debated became studied. His ideas entered conversations far removed from that backstage room. People who had never met him spoke with certainty about what he represented. Yet among those who had been there, that moment remained distinct. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was restrained. It became a reference point, quietly invoked when discussions turned toward efficiency, toward the difference between strength and control, toward the idea that authority did not need to announce itself. Those who understood would nod slightly when it was mentioned. Those who did not were rarely corrected. The story aged well. It did not rely on exaggeration to survive. It required no visual record. Its credibility came from the consistency of its retelling and the caliber of those who told it. Men who were not easily impressed remembered it without hesitation. In time, it became less about Bruce Lee or LeBell as individuals. It became about a moment when certainty met openness, and neither needed to overpower the other. About how mastery could reveal itself without display, and how recognition could occur without loss. The room itself no longer exists in the same form. The people have scattered. Some are gone, but the silence remains, preserved in memory, not as absence, but as clarity. Those who witnessed it learned something difficult to articulate and impossible to forget, that the most decisive moments often arrive quietly, and leave without asking to be remembered.